So effectively, when I talk about resilience, what I'm talking about is one's ability to deal with surprises, change, and unexpected setbacks in a healthy manner. And I've drawn this definition from Paul Donders, who leads an organization called Expand. It's an organization that's it's a multinational, and they work in the area of resilience, mastery, life coaching, do various things. And Paul is the leader of that company, and he wrote a book called Resilience, and this is his definition. He's actually the person that put me onto this, and as a result, I went off and was trained by Expand. The history of resilience goes back to the writings of the likes of Viktor Frankl, Aaron Antonovsky, and then Manfred de Vits. The idea here basically is that these writers had lived through the Holocaust and began to explore why some people managed to survive the death camps and why others gave up hope. What was the difference between those that were able to be resilient, to bounce back in these incredibly difficult circumstances? And as they began to research that, they discovered that there was a couple of key areas that resulted in people being resilient. Which leads me to the slide that's up now, and that is for us today. Why resilience? Why is it important? And there's 4 areas there that I'm wanting to bring to your attention. And the first is the fact that we live in a VUCA world, and I'll unpack that idea shortly. It prevents burnout, and I think, again, against the backdrop of 2020, many of us have found ourselves getting really close to the edge, and resilience is one of the key tools to help us to deal with that. If you're going to lead, and we all lead in some context, there needs to be some form of resilience. And then finally, it promotes just holistic, healthy living. So that's why I'm an advocate for it. That's why I believe in it. And that's why I think it's important that all of us, at some point in our lives, work on and become more and more resilient. So let's talk about VUCA quickly. VUCA basically is an acronym that was adopted by the US military. And it's made up of those 4 words: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And really, the US military coined the phrase to define modern battlefield situations. And there's a number of stories I could tell you, which for the sake of brevity, I'm not going to, but let me just define how I use these terms and how generally in business and around the world these are used. So volatility is the fast, unpredictable rate of change without clear patterns or trends. So the world we live in is changing all the time. It's disruptive all the time. And often those disruptions and changes are not something that we expected. And again, I think we're all kind of tired of hearing about COVID, but COVID is a clear example of that. The world was happily going along with itself. And when we looked again, there was serious volatility around the world. The markets were going crazy, and so on and so on. Uncertainty is the frequent disruptive change where the past is not a clear predictor of the future. So we live in an uncertain world. Today the markets are doing one thing. Tomorrow they could be doing something completely different. We like to think that we're able to predict the future. We plan a nice day in the sun based on what our iPhone tells us, and the next morning, well, it's raining. And so that's this idea of uncertainty. Complexity, there's multiple complex, intertwined technological, societal, geopolitical, and ecological evolutions that are taking place. And these all interact with one another, influence one another, making the world a very complex place. And then lastly, ambiguity. There's very little clarity on what's real or true, and it's very difficult to predict the impact of our actions based on what we believe to be true or not to be true. Now, the great thing with resilience is it brings us some agility to be able to deal with the VUCA world that we live in. This next slide basically is just to try and illustrate some of what I'm talking about in these areas. If we look at volatility, the pandemic is a great example there. Climate change is a great example there. And volatility really is about the rate of change in the world that we live in. Uncertainty is, we're not clear about the future. Global debt, who knows where that's going. Some of the research that I've read coming out of the World Economic Forum is saying that by 2035, 50% of jobs are going to be automated, robotic. And so what does the future world of work look like? We don't know. Being somebody who works in a school, we're obviously preparing people for the future world of work. And so it's a complex situation, an uncertain situation for us. Complexity, multiple key decision factors that need to be taken into consideration. And there, for example, the proliferation of information becomes a key. You've got one expert saying that wearing masks prevents COVID. You've got others that are saying it doesn't. How do we make the decisions as we go forward? Another example there, I think, would be the global response to COVID and how complex that has been and how the various countries have dealt with it. And then lastly, ambiguity, just again there to repeat, it's about lack of clarity about an event or an incident. And a typical example there would be fake news. We read the news these days, and who knows what they're reporting, what their agenda is, why it's there. Is it propaganda? Isn't propaganda? And so some form of media literacy becomes incredibly important to navigate this ambiguous world that we live in. One of the things that I want to suggest, and I've just shoved it on the slide there as a throwaway, if you've not yet had the opportunity to watch Netflix's Social Dilemma, it's well worth watching. It's a film about social media and gets behind the scenes of some of the things happening with the various social media networks. So as I've said, VUCA is a reality. It's there. And so because the world is VUCA, how do we go about building healthy lives, a healthy profession, healthy organizations, cities, nations? And my answer to that question is really the triangle on the right-hand side. We have to start with meaning and purpose. That is the baseline for all of us. And the next level up, I believe, would be resilience. And as a result of that, resilience, we become agile and able to navigate the world that we live in, and are able to do those things on the left-hand side of the slide in a better way. So let's talk resilience. Effectively, as the people have researched subsequent to the Second World War and over time, they've identified these three key areas as let's call it the cornerstones of resilience and what people need to be resilient in life. I'm going to talk about the bottom two first, because the rest of the talk really goes about the top circle, the 7 resilience factors. So we need to have social resources in place. We need to have structural resources in place. What I mean by social resources is things like an appreciative family. We need to be inspired, mentors, positive friends. Those things help us from a social point of view to become more and more resilient. Structurally, to have work, to have talents, to be able to use those talents, to be able to master those talents, to be able to make a meaningful contribution in our work environment, and then lastly, to be in a place where our finances are reasonably healthy. When you've got those two cornerstones in place, it becomes a whole lot simpler to begin to focus on the top circle from earlier, which are the resilience factors. These 7 factors are what you need to be a resilient person. And really what I'm wanting to do is, through the rest of this talk, unpack each one of these 7. Some of them I'm going to dwell on more than others. As I said in the beginning, I'm really trying to give you a bird's eye view, and hopefully coming out of this, you can then go and have a look, see for yourself what areas are areas that you're needing to focus on. So the first one there is reconciled past, and we'll talk quite a bit about that in a moment. Realistic optimism, the ability to solve problems, so problem-solving competence, the opportunity to work with your skills, discipline, self-confidence, and then lastly, healthy relationships. And so a reconciled past, maybe a nice way to define this is to do it in the negative, and to say that somebody who doesn't know, accept, and embrace their past can't enjoy today and plan for their future in a meaningful way. I forget who the author was, but he effectively said that the road to the future runs through the past. And so we need to know, accept, and embrace our past. And to do that, I think there's 3 key areas that one has to look at. First is our history. And by history, what I mean is, what's your story? What have your protagonists, your antagonists bequeathed to you as you've lived your life? And then importantly, have you begun to embrace that and come to terms with your story? The second area there being forgiveness, and forgiveness, I think, often goes around loss and dealing with loss, dealing with the hurts and the suffering that life has brought across our paths. And if there is unresolved issues of forgiveness in our life, we don't have a reconciled past, and so therefore it makes us less resilient. And then thirdly, the whole area of dealing with our fears. And when we talk about fear, there's just kind of 5 of them that I'm wanting to pick up. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's 5 common fears that we experience as human beings. The first one, as you can see there, is that we are never going to be good enough. A friend of mine who had a father who was quite sort of harsh, came home from school one day and he had got, I think it was 85% for his maths test. And his father asked him, well, what happened to the other percentage? So he went and he studied really hard. He came home with a 99% for his mathematics paper. And his father's response was, where's the other 1%? And that kind of history resulted in this particular person believing that he was never going to be good enough for anything. And I have his permission to share that story. Acceptance, a huge issue. Abandonment, a huge issue. Loss of control, and then a loss of respect. These are real fears that human beings experience. And the challenge with fear is that it can result in us becoming one of 3 things. We either become a victim of our fear, we become a victor of our fear, we overcome it, or we become an oppressor as a result of our fear. And so we effectively, another quote, pain that's not transformed is transferred. And so the fear that we experience, we then begin to project on others, and so the cycle continues. So it's really critical as you deal with your past to deal with any fears that you may be living with. Now, this is one area that I'd love to really dive deep into. There's a number of slides. Unfortunately, for time's sake, I'm not going to be able to get through all of them, but I do want to put this one up, which is how do we stop fear in our lives? How do we begin to deal with the fear that we experience? And the first step in that process is beginning to understand and accept why we fear what we fear. So in the story that I recounted earlier, what that friend of mine needed to do was he needed to understand that his father had a father who was harsh and hadn't dealt with his own history, hadn't reconciled his past, and as a result was transferring that. Once he'd done that, he began to accept the fact that actually this wasn't true of who he was. He explored the roots and consequences of it, and got to the point where he was able to forgive his father and deal with the issue, and then began to train the opposite virtue. So he began to teach himself, began to immerse himself with people who were loving and accepting and wanted his best, and encouraged him that he was good enough and the things that he did were more than enough, and so on. And then finally begin to build new habits off the back of that. Fear tends to be the soundtrack or the DVD, the what ifs that we play in the back of our heads. And so building new habits means to replace the what ifs with despite instead of, and to begin to cultivate good mental health through that process. Our next resilience factor is this area of realistic optimism. And I want to just recount a little bit of history, and Paul references this in his book. They did some research on POWs from the Vietnam War. And effectively what the research showed was that the blue sky optimists ended up breaking down in the POW camps. Those who were realistically optimistic ended up surviving and coming out of the camp. So blue sky optimist was, we're going to be rescued tomorrow, it's all going to be okay. Tomorrow came and went, but no, we'll do tomorrow. Tomorrow came and went, and eventually they gave up hope. As the proverb says, hope deferred makes the heart sick, and as a result, those people didn't survive, many of them, the POW camps. Those who were realistically optimistic say, look, it's a bad situation. We've got to make the best of this. There is a good chance that we will be rescued. Those people tended to do well and survive the POW camps in the Vietnam War. So that's just an example that we need to be realistically optimistic in the world that we live in. If we take our context currently, realistic optimism, what does that look like for us as a nation with an unemployment rate that's as crazy as what it is, with a national debt as big as what it is? What does it mean to be realistically optimistic in South Africa? Part of being realistically optimistic is trusting yourself and trusting others. And I don't want to unpack this too much, but what I do want to say is the following. There's this adage that trust is earned, and I disagree with that. I fundamentally disagree with it because I believe that trust is first given and is then maintained. And so I just want to park that thought there. We choose to trust ourselves or we choose not to trust ourselves. We can't earn self-trust. But as we trust ourselves, step out and do things, we realize, actually, I'm able to do this, and then we begin to maintain that trust and build on it. And I believe the same is true in our relationships with other people. As we give trust to others and they maintain that trust, the relationship can grow and go forward. You may argue with me that that's just semantics, but I found in my own life that as I've given trust and maintained trust, it served me really well and has resulted in optimism for relationship and what can happen going forward. The third area there is having a lifestyle of gratitude. And effectively, in this forum, I want to put this idea to you. We need to be critical in our thinking and grateful in our hearts. The thing that prevents our critical thinking becoming a critical heart is gratitude kind of at the neck level. That's what separates us becoming harsh, critical people. So be a critical thinker, but have a tender, grateful heart. And as we gather here this morning, if you've got a piece of paper, a useful exercise I find to do on a regular basis is to do a gratitude exercise. And the first one would be I would say to you is take your piece of paper out and write down 5 people that you are grateful for, but not just who the people are, why it is that you're grateful for them. And then 5 things in your life, and then 5 activities, and then 5 aspects of yourself that you're grateful for. More often than not, as humans, if I put this to you and I say, give me 5 people you dislike, give me 5 things you dislike, give me 5 activities you dislike, and 5 aspects of yourself that you dislike, the list fills up very quickly. However, when we do the gratitude exercise, it tends to be a lot slower process for us. And so build this into your life. Be grateful on a daily basis because it builds resilience as you go along. And then lastly, the idea of healthy enjoyment. I want to read the words of the writer of Ecclesiastes. In chapter 9, they write the following: love yourself, seize life, eat bread with gusto, drink wine with a robust heart. Oh yes, God takes pleasure in your pleasure. Dress festively every morning. Don't skimp on colors and scarves. Relish life with the spouse you love. Each and every day of your precarious life, each and every day is God's gift. It's all you get in exchange for the hard work of staying alive. Make the most of each one. Whatever turns up, grab it and do it heartily. And so enjoy your life. Healthy optimism or a realistic optimism includes this whole idea of, seizing the day and making the best of what we have. I think that scripture really sums up this point really nicely for us. The next one for us would be to be solution-oriented. And there, the 3 points are over there for you. Goal-oriented, in other words, focused, to be able to constructively analyze situations and circumstances, and then to be able to improvise in those circumstances. I'm not going to say too much. I'm just going to run through a couple of ideas and leave them with you. But focus has the following 5 aspects to it. Number 1, I think it's about being future-minded. It's about knowing where you're wanting to go and putting the things in place to go there. So future-minded, It's about being ambitious and bold. It's about being willing to take risks. It's about being assertive, and then finally to be able to prioritize. In many ways, focus and leadership are very synonymous for me in this particular idea. The ability to be constructively analyze situations would be to be a trustworthy person, somebody who's good at calculating risk. The old adage of if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is a good one to live by. And then to have a good sense of reality. What is the world that we live in? This is critical to be able to analyze the situations we find ourselves in and respond to them. And then obviously to be prepared, the good old Boy Scout motto, and in this case I would argue to be strategically prepared for the things that are coming your face. And then lastly on improvisation, to say something along the lines of being the ability to find creative solutions to problems, to challenges, and have a good intuition. I saw the comment there, they asked just that I would repeat the scripture. It's Ecclesiastes 9:7-9, and I was reading the Message translation there. I just like the turn of phrase that Eugene Peterson used in his translation. We've talked about reconciled past, we've talked about realistic optimism, we've just talked about the ability to solve problems, and our next one is the ability to use our skills. Adler and Frankl, in their studies early on in resilience, found that those who in the concentration camps didn't have space to discover and develop their talents found it very difficult to survive. Those who jumped in and used their abilities, even in the harsh conditions, had a far better rate of making it through. And so in their writings, and I would suggest you go and read particularly Frankl's book, discover your talents, work out what it is that you're good at. What are the things that you love to do? And how can you use those gifts, those talents, those abilities, those characteristics? How can you use them to contribute meaning to others? And as a result, you'll begin to experience meaning for yourself as well. And Frankl makes that very clear in his writings. So how do we develop your unique skills? Well, number one, use them to serve others. Contribute in a meaningful way. Don't do work for the sake of work. Do work for the sake of meaning. And there's a lot one can say about that. As you develop your unique skills, a natural energy comes as a result of it. You realize that you can do things. It excites you. It motivates you. It's a very powerful thing for building resilience. Because your skills are independent of you, they build external motivation. You'll feel more healthy. Your appearance becomes a more natural and a more positive one, and you're able to develop further as you go along. So in short, identify what your skill set is, use them daily, work towards mastery of those skills, and then create a personal style of creativity and enjoy it several times a week. Now, what I mean by that is find something creative to do. It could be painting, it could be coding, it could be whatever it is that's creative. Find something like that and do it for yourself several times in a week. And as you do that, it contributes to the things that I've mentioned on the slide. Our next resilience factor is discipline. And there's four big concepts that I want to leave with you here. The first one is the 20-mile march. This is an interesting concept. The Roman armies would, in a day, march 20 miles, then stop, rest, and the next day they would march another 20 miles. Every day, that was the way the Roman army would march. And as one's done research and looked at this, it's a very clever concept. I want to give you a South African example. If you or I had to walk from Pretoria to Cape Town, we would walk approximately 1,500 kilometers. If you walked 15 kilometers a day, you would reach Cape Town in 100 days. That's despite the weather conditions. So if you got up every morning, you walked your 15 Ks, come rain, come sunshine. Now, some clever person went off and researched this idea of the 20-mile march, and their research showed that if you have an option for how far you want to walk on a particular day. So let's say it's a rainy day or it's a hot day and you go, okay, I'm going to walk a little bit less today because it's hot and it's rainy. On a good day, you might walk a little bit further. The research shows that it would take you 130 to 140 days to reach Cape Town. And so that's the principle we're wanting to apply in our lives when it comes to discipline. 15 kilometers a day represents a doable challenge. By going that distance every day, you get into a rhythm and you get into mastery of that, and the challenge becomes easier and easier. And so many of us, and even in this area of resilience, we hear a talk, we get excited about something, we're going to go off and we're going to do this, and we have big plans, but we lack the consistency of the 20-mile march. And so it's a critical area for us in resilience, is to learn to pace ourselves and to be consistent as we do so. The next area of discipline that I think is important for us is the whole area of sleep. Sleep is the chief nourishment of life's feast, according to Shakespeare, and I'm inclined to agree with him. There's been a number of books recently around the area of sleep, the importance of sleep, what it contributes to our health. And so get yourself into a healthy pattern of sleep. Create for yourself, I call it a sleep liturgy. Have your bath, read your book, prepare yourself for your sleep. Stay off of devices that have got blue light, which wake your brain up just before you're wanting to get to bed. And there's tons of books that you can actually go out and read about this. Movement, exercise. If you don't take enough time to exercise, set time aside for illness. I think that's a given. There's much said about that. And then I love what John Wesley said around finances. Earn as much as possible, save as much as possible, and give as much as possible. And remember, if you go back to one of the earlier slides where we had the 3 circles, one of the areas there, the structural one, made mention of us being financially in a good place. And this wisdom of John Wesley, I think, is important. To sum up discipline, I want to say the following, and I think this was Covey that said this, 7 Habits. I think this was his quote. I'm not sure. Having seen the value of small things done consistently, I have concluded there are no small things. And so in the area of discipline, choose something, do your 20-mile march, and you'll slowly but surely build the resilience as a result of that. Self-confidence is a topic kind of all on its own and needs to be unpacked in a fair amount of depth. What I do want to just say is that the first 5 skills, if you do those, you will begin to build self-confidence in yourself. The last area is the area of healthy relationships. And here I want to throw it out there that we need to have 4 areas of healthy relationship. The first is the primary relationship, certainly from within my worldview, and that is a healthy relationship with God, a healthy relationship with self, and then others, and then the created order. And I'm taking that out of the Christian worldview. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. So that's why self is at 2. And others are at 3. When we talk about healthy relationships, particularly horizontal relationships, so with other people, we've got kind of 2 categories of people. We've got people that are good for us, and we've got people that are toxic for us. And what we're wanting to do as we foster relationships is wanting to focus on the people that are good for us and build those people into our lives, and discourage ourselves from engaging with those that are in the negative column. So just to say quickly at the outset, take time to work on yourself regularly. And I think this whole resilience area is important. It's the reconciled past aspect of it. Work on yourself, work on your own ability to relate well to others, and then work on those relationships. So with your friends, the people that are good for you, you've got different kinds of people. The first I want to call the relaxer or the relaxed friend. These are the people that are an unconditional yes to your personhood. They just think you're great. They don't criticize you. They're just fun to be around. They like you. They support you. They think the best about you. And as I said, an unconditional yes to who you are as a person. We need all of these people in our lives. Second one is a partner. That's somebody who helps you to pull the cart. So it could be a spouse, it could be a colleague at work, It could be any of those things, but it's critical that we have partners in our lives. Then encouragers. These are people that point us to our purpose and motivate us to be the best version of ourselves. Again, super important to have those in our lives. Then you want people that give you feedback. These are the guys that love you enough to tell you the truth, and they do it without personal agenda. So it's often the area that we don't like people to do, but it's a very important one that we have people like that in our lives. And then lastly, the mentor there. These are the resourceful people. These are the folk that help to develop us. And I want to encourage everyone to look at finding some person to mentor you. It doesn't matter whether you are an infant or whether you are well into your 80s. It's critical that all of us have somebody that's working with us, walking with us, that can mentor us in the areas of our life. If we go across to the negative column, the leech is the person that immerses you in their victimhood. Basically, it's the people that suck you dry. You see them, and it's like that tip truck that comes, beep, 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 and they just dump all their stuff on you. And you walk away from that experience going, well, that was fun. I went in there happy, and now I'm miserable. You don't want these people in your life. The discourager, they always see the negative. They revel in discouragement. They revel in the fact that there is no hope. For those of you who are Harry Potter fans, what I think of when I think of a discourager is the Dementors, those creatures that come and they guard Azkaban, but they suck everything out of you. There's no hope. You lose all hope when you are around them. The critic is not like the feedback person in the healthy column. The critic is somebody who sees your weakness or invents it, and then reminds you of it. They're continually bringing you down to make themselves feel better about themselves. And then lastly, the manipulator, or second lastly, rather, the manipulator, the person that, always using you, manipulating you for their purposes. And then the aggressor, who is the typical playground bully, a person who can't manage their own energy well. Now, in a previous talk, in the 2018 talk, I took a fair amount of flack for saying we need to move the toxic people out of our lives. There was a pushback from one of the members of the audience, and I took their criticism and I went and thought about it afterwards. And in that particular setting, I think I perhaps did overstate the point. However, I want to say there are particular people in our lives that we cannot afford to allow in our lives. And we have to find a way to live between the tension of loving our neighbor, but at the same time, doing everything that we can to try and live peacefully with others. There's some people we can't live peacefully with. That's not your problem, it's their problem. And it's a boundaries problem. And I want to encourage you to look at if you're struggling in this area, have a look at some of Henry Cloud's work around boundaries and removing the leeches, the discouragers, the critics, the manipulators, and the aggressors from your life. I think this is a bit of a path as opposed to a tightrope, and so finding the balance in that is an incredible, or the tension perhaps is an incredibly important part of being resilient and having healthy relationships. So I'm coming in for a landing, and then we can take some questions. Where to from here? I'm hoping some things have stood out for you, and you may consider further options for further training. I'm going to put the Expand website up for you in a moment. You can have a look there. You can contact them, get some training there. Do self-help training, often a good thing to do as well. Or you can come out of today and you can say, Michael, you know what? My past isn't reconciled. I need to work on the aspect of forgiveness or the aspect of fear. And so you choose one of the resilience factors. Perhaps it's discipline, and you make a concerted effort to work on that particular area. And I hope that each one of us will walk away from this and actually do that. So if you're wanting to get in contact with me, that would be my email address. The Expand website, you can go and read more about Expand and some of the other resources that they do. That's a copy of Paul's book, the cover of Paul's book. And I would encourage you to read that. If we were meeting in person, I would have stuck a sticker under your seat, and the lucky person with the sticker under their seat would have received a copy of the book. Unfortunately, we're not able to do that today. But I do want to encourage you to look at it. You can get it in ebook as well as a hard copy, or sorry, yes, a paperback copy if you're keen. I think at this point, what I'm going to do is kill the slide share and then maybe open the floor to questions. Yeah, look, I think when I say appreciative family, I think we must think broader than say the nuclear family or the extended family. I think when I'm talking about appreciative family, this could be a grouping of friends. It could be so I'm using the word family in a kind of a generic way. Perhaps a better way to say it would be that there's a community of people around you that support you, that appreciate you, that value you. And I think it's in all of our ability to create that for ourselves. If it's not a biological family, you can certainly, a common example would be a church community, for example. There's a way there to create that for yourself. In terms of job and talent match, I hear you in terms of sometimes we've got to just do the work that you've got to do to put the bread on the table. I think a way around that is to then find other areas where we are able to use our skill set meaningfully. So it may not necessarily be in the thing that puts the bread on the table, but this work doesn't necessarily mean your job. Work could mean something completely different. If you have I'm off script here, but if you have an ability to speak in public, and your work doesn't allow you to do that, then TGIF is a great opportunity for you to put your hand up and to match your skill set to a work opportunity. So I think we must be careful how we define the word work in that context.